To get to introduce Dr. Michael Sala. Michael Sala is an expert in politics, foreign policy, peace and conflict resolution. He's a former university professor, and I think what he is best known for to many of you is his groundbreaking work in the field of exopolitics and his book entitled Exopolitics, The Political Implications of the Extraterrestrial Presence, which is a book that really defines the field. It is the book that has set the precedents to take the field to its next level. And today, Michael is going to be talking on some phenomenal material that is going to expose once again some of the veils, some of the secrets, removing the veils and showing you a bigger reality. So it is my privilege to introduce my partner, Dr. Michael Sala.
Thank you, Angelica. It's a real privilege to follow Dr. Strangers, especially given the topic that I'm going to be looking at, which is extraterrestrials living among us. My background is as a university professor, scholar, researcher, written books, done research grants, travelled and done field work in countries, really looking and studying and understanding various things that are happening around the planet. My previous expertise was in international politics and conflict resolution in particular, so I travelled to conflict hotspots in Sri Lanka, Kosovo, East Timor, Macedonia. So just many experiences in those places, but they all involve field work. So when I got interested in this topic of extraterrestrials among us, well, you know, what field work do you do? Where do you go? If you want to study extraterrestrials, you know, do you travel to Venus or Mars or Saturn to study this phenomenon? There's no kind of field trip you do. Well, you do the kind of next best thing, which is you find the people who have had the experiences. And that's what we've done. We've gone out and found the people and spoken to them, gotten to spend some time with them to really gauge just how truthful they are. And I'm really thankful that one of those people we met agreed to come to the conference. Actually, there's more to follow, but one of those is Dr. Strangers. We actually did go and meet him. That was the kind of field work I did, and met him first in Las Vegas at a conference we were attending there. And then we travelled out to California, Chatsworth in Los Angeles, and we got to meet him there, spend more time with him, and just felt the truth in what he had to say. This was a man speaking from first-hand experience of remarkable contacts with extraterrestrials, and something that really touched me because it involved politics. I mean, this is a dream for a kind of scholar in international politics to find that, well, not only is this person conversant with extraterrestrials, but he also got to meet with them in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon of all places. So it's kind of like, wow, I want to know about this. And so that's the kind of background, and that's where we got to meet him and got to invite him to come here, and we're so thankful that he came. Later on, we're going to be speaking with, we're going to be hearing from some others who have had these experiences. Hector Palacios from Mexico has also had some important contact experiences, and we travelled down to Mexico to meet him. And so this is part of the work we do, the organisation that I've set up, and Angelica's also involved with, and in helping set up, and there are a number of others here that have helped it. That's what we try to do, to try to help people doing the field work, trying to go out there, find out who's had what experience, meet them, understand it, evaluate their evidence, and so forth. And so that's the kind of work we try to do, and this is the background that I bring into it. So I'm not an experiencer such as Dr. Strangers or Hector Palacios. I haven't met the ETs yet, or I don't have those conscious experiences. I think there's probably been things that have happened in the background or that I unconsciously have experienced, and probably like many of us here. unconsciously we've probably had many experiences with extraterrestrials, whether it's through the dream state, or whether it's through some kind of telepathic experience, or whether it's just meeting a person who just feels different but you're not quite sure why they're different. We've probably had many experiences like that, but we're not always conscious of it. And so it's quite rare to meet people who are conscious of their experiences with extraterrestrials. And so that's really what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be looking at the evidence of extraterrestrials living among us as has been recounted by many different experiences, many contactees. And I want to go through this kind of at a brisk pace because there's a lot of information here, and I want to give you a kind of sense of exactly what all these people are saying. I mean, there are differences in the way they experience this phenomenon, who they met, where and when and so forth. But the pattern that emerges is one that's really amazing and quite fascinating when you really consider it. It's that they actually live among us and look like us so much that they can be in the midst of an audience like this and we just wouldn't know unless they reveal themselves to us. So that's what I'm going to be doing, looking at extraterrestrials living among us. And I subtitled An Ancient Phenomenon Reemerges in Modern Society, because even though I began to look at this phenomenon in the modern era in terms of the testimony of the contactees, the experiences who have met with and had incredible experiences with extraterrestrials, I also began to encounter the evidence that it's not only in the modern era but also in the ancient era that they have been also living among us. So there's really a modern phenomenon that repeats or is a re-emergence of something that is very ancient and was regarded by the ancients as very sacred and holy, and in fact was so holy and sacred that they made these extraterrestrials recognize them as being divine rulers. So I'll begin with the ancient material. So there are historic cases of extraterrestrials among us. The stories of the ETs ruling or living among these stories are found in many different ancient civilizations. I begin with ancient Egypt because we have there the accounts of a very famous Egyptian historian by the name of Manetho, who was a priest during the Ptolemaic era in ancient Egypt, and he described the history of ancient Egypt in terms of 3 epochs. First, there was the rule of the god kings, 8 gods: Osiris, Horus, Thoth, and so forth. And they were divine rulers. They were gods, and they were described as having all of the powers and the abilities of gods. And we would understand that now as being extraterrestrials, visitors from other worlds who are not from this world per se, but come, and because of their abilities, their technologies, their mental, spiritual capacities, that they are recognized as divine beings, and they did actually rule. This is discussed in Manetho's history of ancient Egypt, that the god kings ruled for 8 dynasties, or the 8 actual god kings. They ruled for many thousands of years, actually, according to Manetho. Then they were followed by the demigods. This was 8 beings who were the genetic offspring of these god kings who had intermarried with the human population. So you actually have the phenomenon here of these extraterrestrials who are breeding with the indigenous population. And there were 8 of these demigods, according to Manetho. And then you have the rule of the human kings, and Manetho's work here is regarded by modern scholars as being very accurate. So there were 30 dynasties in all, and in the first dynasty there were 8 pharaohs. So this repetition of the number 8, so 8 god kings, 8 demigods, and then 8 human kings in the first dynasty of pharaohs. So there's this account of these human human rulers who were preceded by god kings, and that they were very different to the humans. So these were beings that modern scholars now identify as being the gods, and they just regard them as mythological beings. But according to Manetho's description of them as the ancient Egyptians believed them, that these were actually physical beings. They weren't myths. They weren't hypothetical stories surrounding different constellations in the skies. These were beings who lived and ruled among the human population at the time. Another person who did this work, of course, has already been mentioned a few times during the conference, Zecharia Sitchin and the Anunnaki. He described these extraterrestrials as the Anunnaki or the Nephilim that helped establish Sumerian civilization on Earth, and they were rulers. They ruled over humanity. And what's interesting about the Anunnaki was that most of us are aware that you had the two beings, Enki and Enlil, the two Anunnaki rulers who were half-brothers and kind of were rivals for supreme rule of the planet. But what's less known is the Sumerian king lists. This is a list of 8 Sumerian god kings, and this is described in detail in a 4,000-year-old document that explained 8 pre-deluge Anunnaki god kings before the dynastic Sumerian kings. So in other words, just as in ancient Egypt you had human rulers, they called them pharaohs. In ancient Sumeria, not quite sure what the human term or what the Persian term was for it, but they were preceded by god kings. And so the king list begins when kingship descended from heaven. The kingship was in Eridu, the oldest of the Sumerian cities. So these god kings resided in different cities in ancient Sumeria, and they had ruled over the planet for, again, many thousands of years, up until the time when human kings began to appear after the great flood, the deluge. And what's interesting is that they ruled in the 8, there were 8 of these god kings who ruled in different cities in Sumeria and that region of Mesopotamia, and their records are left. And in my book, Angelica mentioned the exopolitics, political implications of the extraterrestrial presence. In there I talk about the stargates that were used by the Anunnaki to travel throughout the galaxy, that there are stargates and information about stargates that were recorded in the cuneiform texts. The Sumerians had these cylinder seals that were used in producing these cuneiform texts that had all records concerning every aspect of life, but they also concerned the activities of the extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki. And in that book, Exopolitics, I actually describe why it is that the US decided to intervene in Iraq and why they deliberately bungled the intervention in Iraq. Any scholar that looks at what happened in Iraq realises that, well, first of all, you know, the traditional explanations for going in there don't really hold water. You don't make money by going into countries and taking over the oil wells. There are so many costs associated with that. You don't make money. So it wasn't really profits. There was something else driving it. And I argue that it was these stargates and the information about the stargates that were holdovers from these ancient Sumerian god kings, and how they used the stargates to travel throughout the galaxy or different constellations. And so this is the reason that they went there, and they deliberately bungled the invasion so that they would stay in Iraq. I mean, you don't negotiate with an army, the Iraqi army, and tell them, you lay down your arms, we'll come in, we'll remove Saddam Hussein, and then we'll help you set up a new leadership, and then you're back in power. You don't then come in and say, yes, we removed Saddam Hussein, but all you guys are fired, the Iraqi army no longer exists, the party in power no longer exists, it's now forbidden, and all of you are out of jobs. Well, you're going to ferment it. a revolution or insurrection, and that's exactly what happened. And it was done deliberately so that the US can maintain a presence in Iraq, because they are seeking this information that was left over from the Anunnaki rulers, the god kings, and the technologies and information that they left there. So I've digressed, so that means I need to move more quickly. So the Anunnaki god kings, they are listed here. The number of years are quite extensive. Modern scholars say that this is just myth, that no one could live that long, but of course we understand that extraterrestrials have different ways of being able to rejuvenate themselves, prolong life for many centuries. And in fact, it seems that these god kings had something that was beyond even what information we have about other extraterrestrials who typically describe themselves as living for several centuries. These god kings lived for thousands of years, so that they had some other abilities. So the god kings in Genesis, they are mentioned again in the Old Testament as ruling over the earth before the deluge. And you have Genesis chapter 6, number 4, the Nephilim were upon the earth in those days, and thereafter too. Those sons of the gods who cohabited with the daughters of Adam, and they bore children into them. They were the mighty ones of eternity, the people of Shem. So they describe the god kings that lived in that era, and that they were mighty ones of eternity. They lived for thousands of years. The Book of Enoch, Dr. Strange has mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed the Book of Enoch's authenticity, and of course the Book of Enoch does talk about this time when the sons of the gods interbred with human women and chose wives, and they numbered 200 at the beginning. So 200 of these beings, fallen angels, Nephilim, descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they began this process whereby there was this long history before the flood of these human-looking extraterrestrials living and walking amongst us, and in many cases were the rulers. Not all of them, of course, would have been rulers. The ones that lived for thousands of years were the rulers. They would have been the ones that had the access to the stargates and whatever other information that privileged technology gave them. The other extraterrestrials lived for several centuries, and they would use what we would regard now as kind of advanced propulsion systems that use anti-gravity drives or electromagnetic drives and so forth. So that's the ancient history. And so what I'm going to be doing now is looking at some of the modern cases. And of course, there you have the photo of Valiant Thor that Dr. Strange has already discussed. And there have been a number of contactees who have talked about these human-looking extraterrestrials who have integrated into human society. So what we're seeing now is this ancient pattern re-emerging, that we are recognizing that this not only occurred in the past, but is occurring now. And so these human-looking extraterrestrials have integrated into society. They adopt local customs, speak national languages, drive cars, possess detailed knowledge of local terrain, and adopt non-invasive methods of interaction. And that's very important to emphasize that there is not just a small group of extraterrestrials, actually many, and the majority of them are actually non-invasive and very respectful of human free will. They don't just come in and take you up into their ship and do biological experiments on you. That does happen, and those are described as invasive cases of interaction. And regardless of what happens subsequently, even if the person then agrees to participate in the program, the fact that one is initially subjected to an abduction process where they are subjected to all sorts of invasive procedures, that makes it something that is, initially at least, disrespectful of human free will. But this group of extraterrestrials are very different. The ones that are human-looking are not invasive in that regard. They ask permission. They go to great lengths to make sure that they in no way violate or compromise a person's free will, and in fact wait for us to be ready. I mean, this is very important. They don't just come at any time when you're kind of going to be shocked and, like 2 o'clock in the morning and being woken up by a bright light and noises. I mean, that's not going to be at the time when your consciousness is kind of most receptive to a a high-dimensional experience, it's going to be quite terrifying or mind-numbing, and you're not going to be quite sure. But many of these cases involving these extraterrestrials occur in broad daylight, occur when the person is fully conscious and able to make choices that are truly reflective of their own free will. So it's very important for people to be able to get over whatever fears, apprehensions they have for these kinds of experiences to happen, because if you're not ready, it's not going to happen. George Adamski was the first of the contactees to discuss extraterrestrials living amongst us, and I will kind of go through his case pretty quickly. Adamski had his first experience in November 1952 that was described as the desert landing, and this was seen by 6 witnesses who signed affidavits saying that they saw the extraterrestrial orthon. Orthon is the person coming out of the ship there, travel, walk out and meet with Adamski, have a conversation, and then left, and Adamski came and told them about what was said. And so this was something that these 6 witnesses declared was true, and that they saw it, and they signed an affidavit, went before the media, and this was something that was covered by some of the local media but didn't really get too much national coverage. There have been investigations of the Adamski case. Timothy Good has investigated it, and according to Good, much of the evidence is sensible and verifiable. And I mention Timothy Good because he's probably one of the very few UFO researchers who really is open-minded and doesn't kind of go in with an attitude of, well, this is ridiculous, I'm going to show just how ridiculous this case is. And then if you take that attitude, then you're going to pick on whatever inconsistencies, and you're going to say, well, this is clearly fraud or a hoax. Timothy Good was very different. He was open-minded. He looked at the evidence on its merits, and he concluded that it was sensible and verifiable. And so he thought that they were, in many cases, accurately reported. Now, it's Adamski's second book, Inside the Spaceships, that I want to go into a little more depth in, because it describes his interaction with human-looking extraterrestrials living among us. So it's not just those that visit in the ships, land, have a meeting with a contactee who is summoned there telepathically. This is what happened to Adamski first time. Summoned telepathically, go to the desert on this day, at this time, and we'll meet. And that's what happened. And then they met, and then the extraterrestrials took off. In this case, it was February of 1953 that Adamski had a meeting, and he met with two men who looked very much like young businessmen, as the photo there of Commander Don that Dr. Strange has mentioned, that they looked very much like us, dressed in business clothes, and you just wouldn't know by looking at them that they were actually extraterrestrials. And Adamski described what happened, how they went for a drive on the Los Angeles highways, and the extraterrestrial drove. So Adamski didn't know how to drive the highway, but the extraterrestrial did. He had a car, and he drove Adamski and his companion to a rendezvous place where they would meet with one of the ships. So this extraterrestrial knew the highway system and could drive. They then described who they were. The taller man spoke for the first time and said, quote, "You have been very patient. We know how much you are wondering who we are and where we are taking you." The speaker smiled and indicated the driver. "He's from the planet you call Mars, and I'm from the one you call Saturn." His voice was soft and pleasant, and his English perfect. I found myself wondering how and where they learned to speak our language so well. So they come from the planets in our solar system. They could be located in any location, whether it's underground, whether it's in the inner side of the planet, on the surface, but they come from planets within the solar system, and they learn our language, they learn how to drive our highway system, they learn our colloquialisms so that they're not easily identified. And here is really what is most amazing about this experience. The Martian spoke for the first time. Quote, "We are what you on Earth might call contact men. We live and work here because, as you know, it is necessary on Earth to earn money with which to buy clothing, food, and the many things that people must have. We have lived on your planet now for several years, At first we did have a slight accent, but that has been overcome, and as you can see, we are unrecognised as other than Earthmen. At our work and in our leisure time, we mingle with people here on Earth, never betraying the secret that we are inhabitants of other worlds. That would be dangerous, as you well know. So just think about this. So you've got these extraterrestrials who are not only visiting us, but they integrate among us on the planet. They learn our languages, they stay here for a number of years to acclimate, and they do all the things that we would consider to be quite normal in terms of buying clothing, food, and later on we'll see that they actually get jobs and have documents, and they actually are described as contact men. And so this is really something that you're not going to find in any university international politics course or any kind of sociology course. It's not something that the system teaches us, that the extraterrestrials, not only are they real, but they have integrated among us. Daniel Frye is another case, another contactee who had these experiences with extraterrestrials, those that are human-looking, living among us. His was an interesting case. He was a technician with Aerojet General Corporation working on rocket propulsion, and an extraterrestrial revealed himself to Daniel Frye back in 1949, where he took Daniel Frye for a ride on his ship to New York and back in 30 minutes. And Daniel Frye describes that in his book. And what's really important here is that we start to get the information from Frye that confirms what Adamski and what others have said, that the extraterrestrials are living among us, that they've integrated, that these human-looking, non-invasive, respectful extraterrestrials that ask permission for any encounter, that they live among us and that they don't reveal themselves unless you're ready for it. And the extraterrestrial who met with Daniel Frye, Alan, he says that although his present assignment requires him to become an American. And he says, the fact that you believe me to be one of your countrymen is a testimonial to the success of the effort I have expended during the last 2 of your years to learn and practice the use of your language and idiom. As a matter of fact, I've never yet set foot upon your planet. It will require at least 4 more of your years for me to become adapted to your atmosphere and gravity and to become immunized to your biotics. So what we're getting here is information about how they prepare, how the extraterrestrials prepare. It's not just a matter of them coming from another planet, landing, putting on business clothes and then coming out and having these interactions. They have to go through an acclimation process. They have to learn the language, they have to learn the idioms, they have to learn how to deal with our gravity that might be stronger or weaker than the gravity on their home planets. They have to learn how to adjust to the atmosphere content. It's just as if you all of a sudden went and spent half a year in a high climate, in high altitude, say in the Andes. If you were to spend half a year there, you would have to go through an acclimation process to be able to prepare yourself. And you would find the atmosphere oxygen to be, the atmospheric, the oxygen content in the atmosphere to be different, so that you couldn't exert yourself as much. You would get more tired if you began to run. So there are certain things that you can and can't do in different climates or atmospheric conditions. And so these extraterrestrials have to go through a process of acclimating themselves, and it takes a few years. Also, the extraterrestrials asked Frye to assist them in integrating with the Earth. They wanted textbooks on English and math, and they asked Frye to get them a forged birth certificate and passport. Since my origin was actually extraterrestrial, it was therefore necessary to find a county registrar who could fulfill the need for my being here and be willing to assist even at some risk to himself. So in other words, they seek out people, even in official capacities, to give assistance to them so that they can integrate here without being noticed. So again, Timothy Good investigated Frye, found him to be credible, and that some of his photographs were genuine. Now, the extraterrestrial told Frye something else that was quite remarkable. quote, "We have made a careful analysis of the steps to be taken so that I may move easily and unnoticed among your people. I must have a profession, or at least a gainful occupation. The ideal occupation would be that of a purchasing agent in an international trading concern. Such a position would furnish a means of livelihood, a good background cover, and an excellent excuse to visit other countries whenever it might become necessary." So, the next time that you meet someone who's working in some kind of trade capacity internationally, you know, maybe ask a few questions. You might get interesting answers. But what we get here is amazing information that they actually will go to great efforts to integrate with us in occupations that give them the ideal cover. Now, in conventional terms, we would regard people like this as being kind of like spies, right? You know, the United States sends a spy to the Soviet Union and says, you know, you train them to speak Russian and to be able to learn the idioms and go unnoticed. And so if you can get to that level, then this person can live there without being noticed and integrate, and then they send back information. So we kind of understand this principle, espionage. And another way of looking at it would be the way we train the Peace Corps. We send Peace Corps volunteers to different countries, and so they get a certain indoctrination in terms of how to fit in, not to stand out too much. You don't want to stand out too much as a kind of flamboyant American in some really poor zone in Africa. That can be dangerous. So you want to be able to fit in as far as possible. So this is what they do. They try to fit in and be as innocuous as possible. Another person who met with these extraterrestrials living amongst us was Howard Menger in his book, From Outer Space, where he described experiences that began from the age of 10. He had experiences, a number of experiences, and in 1947 he described, again, another case of an extraterrestrial looking very much like us, walking into a venue in a normal environment in his society, and this person looked like a real estate agent, just a young businessman looking like a real estate agent. And he came in with this story about wanting to have some assistance in putting up for sale signs in the neighbourhood, and because Howard Menger at the time was doing some real estate work, he agreed to accompany him, and so he hopped in the car, and then after some distance, this is the story Menger gives. "He did not introduce me to a young lady waiting in the car. Very abruptly, the man changed the subject. 'Howard, we know you are keeping your contacts with our brothers a secret, as you have been instructed.' 'Oh, you are,' this is Menger, and I chuckled. He drove a few hundred yards without speaking further. 'You see, Howard, I've been taught much of real estate, but little of acting.' So, again, they go to great efforts to learn about their cover identity, the mannerisms, the language of any person who fulfills a particular occupation so that they can go unnoticed. So Menger describes how he helped the extraterrestrial visitors adjust to Earth by providing them with clothes. So these contactees, they're sought out for particular reasons, and one of the reasons seems to be that they can give help to the extraterrestrials who come to train newly arrived extraterrestrials to acclimate to the human societies. So Menger described giving them clothes, haircuts, dark classes, giving them general assistance. Often I purchased clothing and took it to a point of contact. This is Menger, of course. Visitors just arriving from other planets had to be attired in terrestrial clothing so they could pass unnoticed among people. So Menger is describing the assistance he gave to the extraterrestrials so they could go unnoticed amongst us. Again, Timothy Good did a thorough investigation of Menger and found that his evidence, again, was credible and genuine. So, one of the more interesting cases of an extraterrestrial living amongst us concerns Nikola Tesla, and Angelica mentioned him briefly last night and mentioned Arthur Matthews. Let me mention that Arthur Matthews was both a contactee and a protege of Tesla. In fact, along with Otis Carr, Arthur Matthews was one of the only two people who worked directly with Tesla and were bequeathed all of Tesla's information. And actually, Matthews helped Tesla build a communication device with extraterrestrials, what was called a Teslascope in Quebec, Canada, in 1917 and 1938. So Matthews actually helped Tesla in building these. And so this was someone who certainly knew how to use the equipment that Tesla had believed would establish communications with extraterrestrials. So Matthews says he subsequently communicated with the ETs from Venus during the years 1941 to 1969 with the Teslascope, and they confirmed something that Tesla had told Matthews. So in his book, Wall of Light, what Matthews says is, quote, Tesla said that he believed he came from the planet Venus, and during the landings of a spaceship on my property, the members of that ship said that Tesla was a child from Venus. So Matthews is saying Tesla himself believed he was from Venus. Only told very, very few people this. Matthews was the only person we know that he revealed this to. Tesla didn't write about being from Venus at all. I think Tesla was just under so much pressure, already being attacked and ridiculed. And I think Tesla wisely understood that if he were to say that he was actually a Venusian born in a human family, or a Venusian born, then introduced into a human family, that he would be just kind of laughed and dismissed and committed to an insane asylum. There are other cases of extraterrestrials living amongst us. The Umites in Spain and France in the 1960s and 70s distributed scientific information, and one of the people that experienced these extraterrestrials who looked Nordic and piercing blue eyes is a typist who typed out thousands of pages of documents that was sent off to scientists in Spain, in France, elsewhere around the world, revealing Umite technology and principles, really advanced information that was just typed out and sent to all of these scientists. And the typist said he worked for these extraterrestrials, the Umites. The typist is anonymous. There is one other person who did meet with the Umites, and I'm actually in contact with him, but unfortunately he's in a federal penitentiary. Trumped-up charges have been laid against him, and he's languishing in a penitentiary. This is what they do to contactees, and I'll talk a little bit about that. If a contactee doesn't play by the rule book, often contactees have to discredit themselves. One of the things you learn pretty quickly in doing this research, whether it's contactees, whistleblowers, if you have had a genuine experience, if you've met with extraterrestrials or you've been involved in a project and you go out talking about it to the general public, you're either going to be just quickly put into custody and detained indefinitely, or you'll be eliminated. The only way you can operate in many, many cases is to discredit yourself. And sometimes contactees will do it voluntarily, and other times it happens involuntarily. And with this particular contactee I'm in touch with, it's happened with him involuntarily. He's languishing in a penitentiary, but he had contacts with the Umites as well. The only second person who confirmed meeting with them. So anyway, this typist did meet with the Umites, and he described the leader of the Umites. And very quickly, the leader is not who you would think. In Spain in the 1960s and 70s, it was ruled by General Franco, very patriarchal, machismo culture. And so the leader of the Umites said, you know, we want to meet with you in Spain. We want to come to your place innocuously. You know, we don't want to be seen by many others. It'll just be done very quietly. But we would like to stay with you. Is that okay? And he said, yes, sure. And he expected, you know, the leader of the Umites, you know, some very impressive-looking, kind of Nordic-looking being. Well, he says what he saw shocked him. It was this this girl, this young lady who looked about 16 years old came, and he was astounded that this would be the leader of the Umites. But in fact, this was the leader. That in many of these societies, there is no kind of patriarchal system in place. There is a recognition of consciousness and spiritual abilities, and and I guess as we would understand it now, we would term that, you know, the ability of the goddess, the one who can speak with that voice of truth. And so this extraterrestrial female, the Umite, was someone who, in terms of spiritual status, stood above the other Ummites, and because of that, she was the ruler of the Earth-based mission at the very least. So this was quite a culture shock for the Spanish typist. There was a sighting of an Ummite ship that helped confirm the case. Dr. Jean-Pierre Petit, he's a French scientist, worked at some prestigious French institutions, and he investigated the Ummite case and also confirmed that it was genuine. Other researchers like Wendell Stevens and Antonio Ribera did likewise. Well, another case involves a Mexican contactee, Professor Hernandez, and he met with an extraterrestrial living among us. This was a female who met him at his university teaching position. He was a tenured professor at the medical school at the University of Mexico, and also senior member of the Mexican Atomic Energy Commission. He met with this extraterrestrial female. She gave him amazing information. I mean, that a scientist such as him could only begin to appreciate. And he said he was struggling to understand the concepts, but he was someone that really was very credible and in a powerful position too, as a tenured professor and with this prestigious position at the Mexican Atomic Energy Commission. He used the pseudonym of Professor Hernandez and worked with a Mexican journalist, Zita Rodriguez, to get this information out. Unfortunately, he told the wrong people about this, and what happened was that, well, before I get onto that, let me just say that she displayed remarkable abilities, knowledge of physics, paranormal abilities, and revealed that she was from another world. And she got him to go on one of her ships, or her ship, and to introduce him to outer space. Well, what happened to him was that he revealed his contact experience to physicians who inquired about a knee injury that he had asked his extraterrestrial companion to heal. And so this companion healed the leg injury, or the knee injury, and then he was asked by some medical doctors, well, how's the injury going? And he thought he could confide in them, and he did. And what eventually happened was that they contacted his wife and said, your husband has this incredible story about meeting with an extraterrestrial female. And the wife was jealous, and she said, well, you know, he's crazy. He's making it up. He's just unstable. He really needs some attention here to get this crazy idea out of his head. So they committed him to an asylum for a month. After leaving the asylum after a month, he disappeared, never been seen again. The family were devastated. They just wanted to just close the case. They just wanted their privacy. Zita Rodriguez, the Mexican journalist, tried to get the files that he had compiled on his experiences, but the Mexican security officials stopped this. They wouldn't allow it to happen. The Hernandez case has been investigated by Wendell Stevens, who's been able to corroborate some of this. Well, there have been negative responses to this information. Most of the established UFO researchers considered it bunk, frauds. Donald Kehoe, one of the pioneer UFO researchers, viewed it as, quote, wild tales and totally ridiculous. And he thought that these stories had to be weeded out from credible UFO research, otherwise the whole field would be discredited. The problem was there was a filter that he was using. He was used to working with military people, engineers, scientists, technicians. He regarded them as credible, and he thought that the idea that some civilian without degrees, advanced training, that the fact that they would meet with an extraterrestrial and not a kind of highly credentialed professor or engineer or military official, he just thought it was preposterous. If extraterrestrials came, of course they would want to meet with a brilliant scientist or a high-ranking politician or military official. That was the filter he used, and so he discredited these contactee stories. But of course, the contactees the extraterrestrials are not interested in credentials, especially in institutions that are compromised by power, corruption, and values that are inimical to the kind of spiritual outlook of these extraterrestrials. They would look at the individuals in terms of what resonates in their heart and their consciousness, and they would make that the basis of their interaction. And that is pretty much the way in which I've noticed that these interactions with contactees have occurred. The extraterrestrials recognise this contactee as being someone who has a profound spirituality, and we certainly saw a wonderful example of that with Dr. Strangers. I mean, very spiritual being, and you can understand why they would pick a man like that to have their contact. And later on, tomorrow morning, you're going to hear Hector Palacios, who's also a contactee from Mexico, Zacatecas, Mexico, and you will see again the tremendous spirituality he has. These are the people that extraterrestrials want to meet and interact with. They're not interested in the generals, the politicians, the scientists. They're not interested, because these people don't radiate that heart energy. They don't connect with that. I mean, you can have the brilliance of a highly credentialed scientist, the mind, but if the heart isn't there, if the spiritual values aren't there, they're just not interested. So you have just that continuing pattern of these contactees being discredited by UFO researchers. Dr. Alan Hynek was another example of this. Well, there have also been whistleblowers who have talked about these contactees. Just I want to get a sense of how much time I have left.
45 minutes.
Good, thank you. There have been a number of whistleblowers who have come forward to reveal the presence of extraterrestrials and have integrated themselves among the human population. So these are whistleblowers. We're not talking about contactees anymore, people who have worked in official capacities with governments and corporations, military, who have had experiences, seen documents describing or revealing extraterrestrials living amongst us. And so these whistleblower testimonies help confirm what the contactees are saying. One of the most important is Robert Dean, Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, who worked for 27 years with the US military and then worked for 14 years after that with FEMA. And he says that in 1964, he read a top secret, ultra compartmentalized document called The Assessment. And it described the NATO, it set out a number of guidelines for NATO's response to UFOs, and it discussed extraterrestrial life. And it described how human-looking extraterrestrials could infiltrate government, military institutions and human society. So a NATO document in 1964 revealed this. He said that they posed a security dilemma to NATO that greatly worried senior officials. This is what he said. Quote, "There was a human group that looked so much like us that really drove the admirals and the generals crazy, because they determined that these people, and they had seen them repeatedly, they had had contact with them. These people look so much like us, they could sit next to you on a plane or in a restaurant and you'd never know the difference. And being military and being primarily paranoid, that bothered the generals and admirals a little bit. That the fact that these intelligent entities could be involved with us, walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Powers in Europe, walking down the corridors of the Pentagon, my God, it even dawned on a couple of them that these guys could even be in the White House." There have been other whistleblowers who have come forward to reveal their experiences with extraterrestrials living among us. Ingo Swann is a remote viewer who in 1975 was approached by a covert branch of the US government because of the tremendous success he was having in the CIA's remote viewing program that began in 1972. That's actually incorrect. The first paragraph. It began in 1972, called Project Stargate. Interesting name. Swann's success rate was so impressive that by 1975 he was recruited by a covert government operative, Mr. Axelrod, to spy on extraterrestrials. So here's something interesting. Here you've got a guy that's starting off in this pioneering remote viewing program, headed up at the Stanford Research Institute that the CIA and other military intelligence organizations funded. And after 3 years, these people were having such a success rate that Ingo Swann was recruited to do some spying on extraterrestrials. So Swan remote viewed extraterrestrials on the dark side of the moon who had bases there. Well, this is 1975. Why would they want to remote view the remote side of the moon? Well, you think about, when was the last Apollo mission? 1971, right? What happened? Apollo 17, the last one, they had 2 more Apollo missions, Apollo 18, Apollo 19, fully funded, rockets are ready to go. What happened to them? Never left. Why? Well, I mean, as it turns out, the extraterrestrials told the US government, we don't want you here. Get lost. And that's what happened. They simply couldn't put up any more Apollo missions on the moon because the extraterrestrials told them to get lost. So then, well, what do? You know, you're the government. We can't go up there anymore. If we put things up there, they'll shoot them down. How can we find out what they're doing? What are they up to? I mean, those ETs on the dark side of the moon, we have no intelligence on them. We need intelligence, good quality intelligence. What do? Well, you approach this pioneering remote viewing program at Stanford Research Institute. You get their top person, Ingo Swann, to do some psychic espionage for you. You pay him $1,000 a day. Back in 1975, $1,000 a day was a lot of money. I'd enjoy working. I did some consulting with the State Department back when I was working at the university, and they pay you well. Unfortunately, they don't want my services anymore. Well, anyway, they paid him $1,000 a day to remote view, and he gave them the information about what the extraterrestrials are doing there. But what was really fascinating was that he had an experience at a Los Angeles supermarket where he noticed a very attractive, scantily clad female. He intuitively received the information that she was an extraterrestrial. He then saw her being followed by 2 of Axelrod's operatives. So rather than me... Can we play this? Is the sound connected? Okay, we'll see how the speakers hold up in the power system.
As you noted, wasn't wearing any clothes.
Well, there were several of them.
There were several.
And they were humans, just like we were, so far as I could tell. And they didn't have any clothes on.
They didn't have any clothes. Those ETs on the moon. But later in Los Angeles, which you nickname and others have La La Land, you met an alleged ET in the supermarket.
I didn't quite meet her.
No, okay. You saw her. You saw her.
Well, I was giving a dinner party for somebody down there when I was staying with a friend, and we went to the supermarket to shop, and I was going to have stuffed artichokes. You know, I'm a gourmet cook on the side. And as I got into the vegetable part, there was this incredibly sexy gal standing at the artichokes looking through them, you know, and she had, you know, maybe 3 inches of clothing on and dark glasses, and she was just statuesque and everything. Oh, my God, would you look at that? So I went over there and started fiddling with the artichokes, trying to, you know, I was obviously casing her out the side of her eyes and everything like that, and I got the strangest feeling. The hair on my arm sort of, you know, I got goosebumps all over and stuff, it just dawned on me that this woman was an extraterrestrial. And I would have thought that was my imagination, of course. But when I had worked with Mr. Axelrod, he had 2 guys that sort of honchoed things around and so forth. And I sort of stepped back from this gal, and I got out the corner of my eye, saw one of these guys, you know, about 60 feet away, watching her and watching me. And I turned around, and there was the other one. There was these 2 of Mr. Axelrod's henchmen were there, I guess, following this gal around. And I put this together right away, and I said, oh, I've stepped into something that I don't belong in. So I skedaddled and went and hid in the bread department while I tried to figure out what to do. And the thing to do was to get out of the grocery store. Yeah.
Well, a few days after encountering this being in the supermarket, you did receive a call.
Axelrod called me up,
yeah.
And he was very concerned about whether she had made telepathic contact with me. He was really, really worried about that. And I said I didn't think so, but I just, you know, this was a completely untoward event, and I just knew right away that this whole problem is, they know, there are Earth people who know that there are ETs on the moon. They know there are ETs, and the big problem is that ETs can read our minds telepathically, but we can't read theirs because our telepathy telepathy is not developed enough. And that was the real problem that Mr. Axelrod was really involved in at the time.
Well, pretty important problem. Axelrod asked you to let him know when you achieved 65% accuracy in your psi work. After you did so in July of '77, you met him in the lobby of SRI, and he asked you if you'd like to see a UFO. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, then you were flown.
Okay, well that's the end of that description, but basically what you have there is an account of extraterrestrials living among us, and Ingo Swann meeting with one by chance, and that the extraterrestrial was being shadowed, being followed by covert government agents. So not only is this confirmation for what we've been saying about extraterrestrials living among us, it's also telling us that the government knows this, and they follow them. They follow the extraterrestrials. They actually monitor them. Well, why would they monitor them? Why wouldn't they detain them, you know? I mean, illegal aliens, right? What happens to illegal aliens? If government knows about you, well, you get kind of taken into custody and go through some process and deported, right? Well, I mean, these are illegal aliens, aren't they? Or maybe they're legal or quasi-legal, and the government is keeping that from us, that, well, there are certain extraterrestrials who come here, integrate, and we know about it, but we don't tell the public about it. All we do is monitor them, and if any individual is crazy enough as to actually meet them and reveal this to the public, well, then we're going to get involved with them. And what was interesting from that case was Axelrod, who was the covert contact for Ingo Swann, was really concerned about the extraterrestrial having telepathic communication with Swann. He wanted to know, did she communicate with you? And he said, no, I skedaddled, you know, I saw your guys and I just left. Well, why would he want to know if Swann had telepathic communication with the extraterrestrial female? It's because they want to monitor all of the communications that people have with extraterrestrials. Anyone who has a contact experience, they want to know about it. And if you have any kind of communication, telepathic or otherwise, the government agencies want to know all about this, and they will go to great efforts to make sure that that you tell them everything. So even though they know about this, as I'll discuss a little more later, nevertheless the government will go to great efforts to debunk the whole phenomenon. So you have, like in 1953, the debunking would result in the reduction in public interest in flying saucers, which today evokes a strong psychological reaction. So this is in the report itself. This education could be accomplished by mass media such as television, motion pictures and popular articles. Such a program should tend to reduce the current gullibility of the public and consequently their susceptibility to clever, hostile propaganda. So in other words, what you're getting here in the Robertson panel is that UFOs are bunk. It's something that is believed by gullible publics, and anything that appears in the media should really reduce the credibility of this. So you basically foster the impression that, well, you know, it's little green men, and anyone having experiences with little green men, I mean, they're just kind of like, they should be locked away, and it's not really sensible. So what you do there is you don't really deter the public, because, you know, a lot of the public are still going to go out there and talk about their experiences, but what you do deter is you deter the professionals. You deter tenured faculty in universities, you deter bureaucrats, you deter any government official, military official from talking about this, because if official government reports say that this is bunk and anything that appears in the media or in the official circles should tend to discredit this, and you are saying something different, well, your career is directly threatened. And if you've spent 10 years, 15 years advancing through the ranks to become a diplomat with the State Department, or a bureaucrat or a tenured professor, you don't want to risk that lightly. And that's what this has succeeded in doing. The debunking program hasn't silenced the general public, because you still have lots of books being written, but what you do is you silence the professionals, the ones who really should be talking about this and should be writing about it and studying it and analysing it and revealing it to the public. And this is in fact what has happened. The professionals are silenced totally, and even politicians can very quickly back away when they know it's true. Even in this present Congress, we have a number of officials, congressmen, that are aware of what's going on, congresswomen too, and a couple of them are running for the presidency, and I won't mention who. They know that this is real, but they will not say a word about it because they know that their candidacy will be sunk and that their positions will be threatened. So that's really what the debunking succeeds in. It succeeds in getting the professionals debunked. I mean, succeeds in deterring the professionals. And that has a severe consequence, because the media then won't take it seriously. Because I remember when I was working at American University, I was assistant professor, I would regularly do radio interviews. I did a few television interviews for my work on East Timor and Kosovo. They would come and ask me for my opinion on this. Well, if the media is going to take this issue seriously, they're going to say, well, you know, is there a professor, is there a bureaucrat or a military official who is someone we can talk to about this? They're not going to go to speak to people that they believe to not have the credentials that they're used to for covering stories. And this is the kind of, so it's like they've raised the threshold. They've got an artificial threshold for taking any story seriously. And for UFOs, they go an extra step. So, you know, for a credible journalist, they will take two credible sources to write a story about anything. And if a whistleblower comes forward and talks about some government malpractice in, say, health industry, it takes a couple of whistleblowers or you got a kind of expose on the Washington Post, New York Times. When it comes to the ET phenomenon and government cover-up, it's like the reporters, they raise that threshold even higher. And it's because the professionals are out of this that means that it never gets in the news. And this is the consequence of this official debunking. Discrediting, we have tomorrow, Dr. Robert Woods is going to be talking about the Majestic documents. One of those documents is the Special Operations Manual, 1954, and he talks about, this manual talks about the crash retrievals of UFOs, and of course crash retrievals also involve extraterrestrial biological entities, and it says here what to do about witnesses. Quote, witnesses will be discouraged from talking about what they have seen, and intimidation may be necessary. If witnesses have already contacted the press, it will be necessary to discredit their stories. This can be best done by the assertion that they have either misinterpreted natural events, are the victims of hysteria or hallucinations, or are perpetrators of hoaxes. So anyone talking about this, you're going to be subjected to this kind of process. So you can see why a lot of professionals just keep away from this like the plague, because this is the sort of thing that happens, this discrediting process. It can be quite vicious. And this applies not only to UFO crash retrievals, it also applies to contact experiences with extraterrestrials. So what does the government do if you have cases of extraterrestrials living among us and people are having interactions with them? You're not disclosing this to the general public, you just want to be able to monitor it. You want to be able to have the ability to coerce anyone having this kind of experience from, you know, following the rules. So if anyone here has an experience with an extraterrestrial and you're told the truth and then you get fired up to go out and tell people, tell your friends, your family, the press, you've got photos, you've got all this incredible information to share, well, what's going to happen? Well, there's this regulation that was passed by NASA. In 1969, it's called the Extraterrestrial Exposure Law. It was a regulation titled Extraterrestrial Exposure, and it's dubbed the Extraterrestrial Exposure Law. And it offers a legal precedent for the detention and indefinite imprisonment of anyone who comes into contact with extraterrestrials. In fact, any extraterrestrial material at all, or information. the NASA administrator determines if there is probable cause that extraterrestrial contact has occurred to activate the law. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that the NASA administrator or any delegate of the NASA administrator, if they believe that there's probable cause that you've had extraterrestrial contact, they've heard you, they tap your phones, or they've seen things in your vicinity, or they've seen you go out to a particular location. If they suspect that you've had an extraterrestrial contact, they have probable cause. And that means that then the NASA administrator can detain you indefinitely without habeas corpus, without any legal process. And this is quite threatening. Now, one of the things that people often kind of point to say, well, this regulation was passed in '69 with the Apollo missions, but after the Apollo missions stopped and there weren't any more kind of manned missions to the planets, the exposure law became kind of redundant, wasn't necessary. So it was put on reserve, no longer applies. So in 1991 it was revoked. This is true. It was actually revoked, but it was put on reserve. What that means is just a legal, it's just a legal manoeuvre. Basically, it still can be cited as precedent from any council of any government bureaucracy that is advising any government agent or official as to the legality of detaining people who have had extraterrestrial exposure. They will say, well, what statutes, what government regulations talk about anyone who's had extraterrestrial exposure? Nothing. There is nothing there except this, the extraterrestrial exposure regulation passed in 1969. Even though it's been revoked, it is a legal precedent that can be cited by the council for any government agency or military department, which makes it legal, or at least the council can advise that it's legal to detain anyone who's had extraterrestrial contact for as long as the NASA administrator determines it or his delegate determines it. So, what does that mean? It means that if you have had extraterrestrial contact and the government knows about it, no matter how much information, no matter what tremendous evidence you have to share and life-altering information it is, you can have a knock at the door, you can have someone come from the government and say, we know you've had contact, we know you've spoken to them, and we can and will detain you as long as we like if you don't do this for us. And that can involve anything. It can involve them asking you to tell everything you know and then swearing that you will not tell anyone else. It can involve you telling everything you know and then saying you have to discredit yourself if you're going to say anything about this in public. They can do anything because they have the power, the legal power to do it because of this extraterrestrial exposure law. So what do we do about this? So we know extraterrestrial visitors are indistinguishable from humans living among us. They appear to have very attractive physical characteristics, described as some of the most beautiful people ever witnessed. These extraterrestrials were very likely the same angels and or god kings from antiquity that walked among and or ruled over ancient societies. So we can sort of understand now what happened. We're having extraterrestrials visiting us now with these advanced technologies, governments in this kind of furious race to reverse engineer as much of the technology as possible and say it's ours, because this is part of the process that they have engaged in. Reverse engineer as much as possible so that when the day comes that the extraterrestrials reveal themselves with all of this incredible technology, the government can turn around and say, well, they're not that advanced after all. We pioneered these kind of nanotechnology instruments, 15, 20 years ago. We pioneered these advanced cloning technologies, healing modalities 20 years ago. We just didn't tell you because it was national security. That's what they want to get to. They want to get to that point where the revelation or the revealing of the extraterrestrials not only visiting us in their advanced vehicles, but also living amongst us, when that knowledge is not going to be so disturbing to the social fabric. So this is something that is being, I think, actively being pursued at the moment, which helps us understand why it is that 20,000, 50,000 years ago, whatever it was, that these ancient god kings, or the extraterrestrials were regarded as god kings by peoples who were not technologically developed enough to be able to rationally explain these advanced principles whereby they would be able to fly from planet to planet, be able to do incredible healing on individuals, holographic technologies, communication technologies. People 20, 30, 40,000 years ago couldn't understand this. Anyone who had those sorts of abilities or technologies, it was magic. And anyone who does magic, well, you know, you're divine, right? It's a gift from the gods. So we can understand why it was these ancient societies in Egypt, Sumeria, India, South America regarded the extraterrestrials among us back then as gods, and why they were, you know, why they became the god kings. Not all of them, but the leaders. So we know that they go to great trouble to learn our languages, drive our highways and so forth. They interact in gentle, non-invasive ways. They're described as respecting human free will, and they are not involved in genetic experimentation or secret government agreements. So let me repeat that. They are not involved in genetic experimentation. These extraterrestrials who look like us do not need our genetics. Why would they? I mean, they look like us. In many cases, these are giants. These are the kind of the template for a kind of divine human with abilities that we would regard as kind of magic or godlike. Amazing abilities to be able to control these technologies through your thought processes. And you think about that some of these advanced technologies require concentrated thought. Your ability to interface with technology and to be able to do it in a way that this is something that helps your evolution. So they are able to combine the development of not only the mind, the mental capacities, but also of the heart, of the spiritual capacities. Because this is, and Angelica talked a little bit about this, that when you are fully in touch with the full emotional range, you can communicate with spirit, with soul, and because it's the emotions that communicate with soul. So these extraterrestrials have preserved that emotional aspect to their lives, and so they are in full communication with their souls, and they use this for using their technology responsibly. And again, we get the message from the contactees is that you, as a civilization, have not learned how to use your technology in an ethically responsible way. You have not spiritually matured enough to use it wisely. And they say that again and again. So they don't need our genetics. We need their philosophy, their ethics. And this is what they bring. They bring that message of principles of God consciousness, Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, whatever we want to term it, whatever framework we choose. They bring these principles to us and say, you guys have to work on this. You guys need to develop this consciousness in your society. And when you do, you'll get in touch with higher source, and then we can work with you more in giving you these technologies. But as long as you're divorced from these, the technologies will be something that are just kind of like just outside of your grasp. And so we really need to develop that spiritual component if we are going to really get to use these technologies wisely without going through the cycles that earlier civilizations had of developing to a very highly sophisticated technological industrial society and then collapsing. Why did Lemuria, Atlantis, and even before that, why did they collapse? Because they did not find the balance between the kind of technological and the spiritual. And so this is what the extraterrestrial visitors are telling us. We have to find that balance, and prior civilizations didn't find that balance. And I think this is very important, that we as a civilization are at risk if we don't find that balance. And I think even those that are in the government, the covert branches that are monitoring this information and maybe even listening to all the presentations here, they're aware of this. They know about ancient history. They know that Atlantis was real, reached a level of sophistication that surpassed the United States, that Lemuria was real and reached a level of kind of spiritual capacity is far beyond anything else we've seen on the planet. But these societies collapsed. And why did they collapse? Because there was some mismatch or some imbalance between the kind of technological tools that were developed and the kind of spiritual abilities that the peoples had developed. And so they're aware of this, but they pay lip service to it because they are embarking on this drive to acquire technology as much as possible to meet with any contingency. And I think last night, for those of you who were brave enough to stay through to the end of Sabella Clare's presentation of Bird's Eye View, you see there a really nice depiction of what drives the government. They are convinced that we're doomed, right? They're convinced of it. All their data points to the planet has no chance. There's no way. All these light workers doing their kind of circles and spiritual communications and meditations, it's not going to change things. We're doomed. Let's get as much money as we can. Let's milk the economy, the American people, as much as we can. Develop our black budget as far as possible. Get 1.7 trillion or more a year that we put into these continuity of government projects. That's what they are, continuity of government projects. They are freaked out by the possibility that all life on the planet will be devastated by some extinction level event or something, some cataclysm that will make life on the surface impossible. So they want to develop these deep underground military bases for up to 1 million people, funded from whatever it is that they can find revenue. Or they want to develop fleets of spacecraft to go off planet. So this is what drives them, and Sabella's movie is really a humorous way of looking at what is a very serious mindset. This is serious. They really believe this. They're convinced we have no chance. And of course, many of you here, we're celebrating the emancipation, the victory that we've done it. And it's like we look around and we see the rest of the world are having problems catching up. But I guess living in Hawaii, you can kind of feel that you've done it. It's kind of blue skies and dolphins in the water. It's this is the life. This is the paradise. We manifested it, and so there's a mismatch here between those that control the power and those that are kind of more spiritually in tune with extraterrestrials and with the planet. So they operate like a galactic Peace Corps, and they blend in, learning all about us. They're monitored rather than taken into custody. So government agencies is just like the Men in Black movie. Men in Black, it's a really humorous way of looking at the truth. It's like you want to disclose the truth. Well, you put it out there. You hide the truth out there, right in front of people's faces. So you kind of have a movie like Men in Black, and it puts the truth right in front of people's faces. But they laugh at it. It's kind of humor. It's Hollywood, and of course it can't be real. But in fact, there's a lot of truth to that. Now, this is important because the extraterrestrials living among us do not pose a national security threat. Because if they did, why would they allow them to walk amongst us and monitor them? Wouldn't they take them into custody? If these beings constituted a threat, they'd take them into custody, right? Well, they just monitor them, and essentially it's because they understand that they're no threat. They're just trying to raise the consciousness of people who are receptive to this higher order of knowledge. And I think there's enough people within the government who understand that this is important. Even though they might believe that the planet stands no chance, they still understand that the extraterrestrials are important for the future, and that the more people are awakened and raised to their higher potentials, that's probably a good thing. But nevertheless, it's still something that they keep from the general public, and so secrecy is maintained by threats, intimidation, discrediting witnesses or contactees. So anyone who's had these experiences, that is the national security threat. According to the literature, the research I've done, that the real national security threat is not the extraterrestrials who walk among us, who can be kind of like, it's almost like the Men in Black movie. They come in off planet, you kind of register with wherever the monitoring agency is. You register, and then the government kind of like has people, men in black, kind of going around and monitoring, you know, what are the ETs doing, what are they up to, what projects they're doing. Oh, this one's doing galactic peace work stuff, you know, raising consciousness, he's fine. Or this one over here, you know, they're a bit shady. Look, they're kind of colluding with terrorists and something. We should do something there. So they're kind of monitoring and the situation. So the real national security threat, though, is the individuals who have contact, because if they are believed, if the mass media and the general public believe them, then that can break the secrecy system. And so that's why they maintain this secrecy through threats and intimidation, because ultimately it's a psychological process here that has kept the secrecy intact for decades. Since the 1960s, we've been conditioned to believe that Venus, Mars, the inner planets are inhospitable to life, and that extraterrestrials who interact with us are these greys, short greys, doing invasive abductions. Psychologically, what that does is that gets people to kind of like say, "Ooh, this is not something I want to know about. This is something that's kind of icky," and it doesn't thrill you. But if you were told the truth that there are these human-looking extraterrestrials who visiting us from within the solar system and beyond, and that some of them actually live among us, and they look so much like us you can't recognize it, and as a bonus, I mean, they're incredibly beautiful beings, incredibly beautiful. I mean, is that going to inspire you or what? Is that going to kind of alert you to the possibility of a more evolved life or a more beautiful life? If you learn that these beings, incredibly spiritually evolved, very attractive beings with this amazing information and incredible technologies to share, if they're here and they're walking amongst us, if you believed that, if you thought it was real, you'd be inspired and you'd go out there and say, I want to meet these beings. Oh, you know, I want to open up. And we've had that. We've had the start of that with the presentation last night with Angelica, with Dr. Strange's presentation today, his invocation of those energies. And with my presentation, I'm just bringing to you a possibility, a vision of a world where we become fully conscious of these star family. That's what they are. They're really star family. They are our progeny in a way, that their genetics are a part of the establishment of the human family on this planet. That they're not here to come rip us off of our genetics and deplete our resources. They're here to give us this incredible information, and that we should not be sidetracked by the information that is put out that, well, they're really here to take your genetics and they're really here because, you know, they want to take over our resources. That does pertain to some extraterrestrial groups. I mean, some are of that disposition. But just like in any society, you get 95% of citizens are law-abiding, and you get 5%, 10% that are, you know, that have these criminal tendencies. But our societies flourish because those that build pass laws, regulations to ensure that those that would manipulate or would take advantage are kept in check. And so the extraterrestrials have something similar in place. So we know about the debunking, we know about the evidence that is being routinely dismissed, and the debunking is used to help the secrecy policy. Okay, so what we need to do is to formally recognise the right to interact with extraterrestrials. Last year at the conference we had a declaration on promoting peaceful relations with extraterrestrials, and we circulated that at the last year's conference, as we've begun to do with the document for this year. And it's a declaration that adopted a number of principles for how we wanted to interact with extraterrestrials, civilizations, to promote world peace. And it referred to the right for interacting with extraterrestrials. Angelica mentioned the conference presentations. We have all of those. They're available outside if you're interested in any of those. The Hawaii Declaration we adopted last year quote, affirm the natural right of all citizens to have open contact with representatives of extraterrestrial civilizations in all cases and to engage in non-official diplomacy. So that's in last year's declaration, and it's also in this year's Earth Transformation Declaration. It's been incorporated in Article 12, so you'll see it in there. For those of you who haven't got it, there's blank copies on the registration desks, and when you complete them, put your completed copy next to the blank ones and we'll collect them and collate them. And tomorrow we'll give you the revised version after we've gone through a process of, first the speakers meet at lunchtime, so all speakers, we're going to meet at lunchtime up in the conference suite. And then this afternoon at 5, after the last session, we're going to have an interaction where all of you, we're going to listen to you. We're going to listen to your responses. You've been kind of absorbing all of this for 2 days now, or 1.5 days. And this afternoon you get a chance to give your feedback on the importance of these principles and some of the things that have been discussed. So why is it that we have so little information coming out on contactee reports and so much information coming out on abductee, invasive extraterrestrial interactions? Why is that? Well, one, bias and poor research methodology on the part of veteran UFO researchers regarding contactee testimonies. So they will routinely debunk contactee testimonies well, I won't mention names, but one very well-known veteran researcher routinely debunks contactee reports, actually a number of them, but they will embrace abduction reports. Betty and Barney Hill is accepted as credible. Why? Because they were treated by Dr. Benjamin Simon, a trained Harvard psychiatrist with credentials, using hypnosis to get that information from them. So this is regarded as credible, but contactees who have these experiences and have independent witnesses and photographs and film, it's kind of like, oh, they're making it up, they're just embellishing, you know, the photos are fraudulent and so forth. It's just, there's poor research methodology and a lot of bias that's happening here. And two, there's a deliberate shadow government policy to steer the public attention towards invasive rather than non-invasive interactions with extraterrestrials in order to justify draconian national security laws concerning extraterrestrial visitation. Here's the big problem. The big problem is you got a $1.7 trillion budget, a black budget that's siphoned off the drug trade, corporate crime, oil, any illicit mechanism that the CIA can dream up, they will siphon off money. Government agencies are not exempt. Why is it that Hardened Indian Affairs and Veteran Affairs can never supply the services? Because the CIA has the legal authority to go in and get some of those appropriations and use them for their own purposes. For developing these continuity of government projects, deep underground military bases, fleets of spacecraft, and they want to do this, and they do not want to give up any of that money. They do not want to give it up, and even if there is disclosure, they will still put out a lot of information saying, okay, the ETs are here, but they're not these, you know, goody two-shoes Venusians giving you these wonderful kind of spiritual interactions. You know, that's just bunk. The real stuff is these, you know, greys and doing the abductions, the invasive procedures, and they're a threat. We need to have a prepared military to deal with these guys. And we are the people you can trust, you know, the military. You can trust us with your money. And that's what they'll do. They'll basically get these black budget funds and they'll bring them into the white world where there's congressional appropriations that says, yeah, sure, you want $1.7 trillion a year now. Sure, we'll sign it off and, you know, won't ask questions. That's what they want. So, extraterrestrials living among us is a modern manifestation of a phenomenon that's also occurred in ancient societies. As we learn more about the ETs among us, we're likely to learn more about how they historically interacted with humanity in the past and their role in the formation of key religious traditions. So, as we learn about the ETs that are here now, we will learn more about those in the past. So So human-looking ETs are helping humanity prepare. And what can you do to help this? Well, those of us that are doing this work, we do many different things, and it's always a love of, a kind of labour of love for many of us. And what we need to do is build institutions, organisations to support this work. The Exopolitics Institute was created to do this. It's actually based here in Kona, Hawaii. We recently got our 501c3 status, which is very important because it means that all contributions are tax exempt. And so this is one of the things that we hope will help to fund individuals and organisations, is to create these bodies that can support researchers and can support conferences like this. The Institute supported last year's conference and it's supporting this year's conference. There's a desk out there for the Exopolitics Institute. You can get a brochure on it. You can join as a member, and those that join as a member for the conference, they will get a free book, a collection of conference proceedings from 1995. And so that'll be your gift for joining as a member of the Exopolitics Institute and supporting this work. And we also do trainings, certification programs for those that are wanting to learn more about exopolitics or learn more about citizen diplomacy. We actually do have a training. We have the dolphins are wonderful trainers, or a wonderful bridge to these extraterrestrial communications. We're going to have some dolphin presentations later today and tomorrow, where you get to see more about the dolphins and hear more about the tremendous work that they do, and Angelica mentioned them last night. And so we do trainings with the dolphins, and they are a bridge to having the requisite skills for fully interacting with extraterrestrials, whether they come on the ships or whether they're living among us. So the dolphins are a great bridge because you meet them in a foreign environment where you have very little power. They are in their own environment, and it really is a process to adjust to that. So that's the end. Thank you for your patience.